I'm recording this now because there are parts of the story that no longer stay where I put them. They move. They resurface at inconvenient hours, uninvited, like cold air slipping through a door I swear I locked years ago. I've tried telling this out loud before, to doctors, to a priest once, even to another deputy who thought he understood isolation because he worked night shifts. None of them heard what I was actually saying. They heard weather. They heard stress. They heard a man who spent too many winters alone. So this time I'm doing it differently. This time I'm speaking into a recorder that doesn't interrupt me, doesn't nod sympathetically, doesn't look away when I say the wrong thing in the wrong order. This is not a statement. It's not an official report. It's a record, the way things actually happened, layered the way memory really works. Pieces from then, stitched to what I know now. I was a county deputy in Iron Ridge County, Montana. That part is verifiable. You can check the records. Small department, big territory. Too much land, too few people, and winters that seem to stretch longer every year you survive them. I believed in procedures. I believed in maps. I believed that if something existed, it left evidence. Tracks, heat signatures, paperwork. I believed that fear was just the body misfiring in unfamiliar terrain. That belief didn't survive the Snowline. I didn't have a word for it at first. None of us did. We just called it the boundary, or sometimes the edge. Later, I heard an older dispatcher call it the quiet place, like it was a joke. Like saying it lightly could keep it that way. The Snowline wasn't a straight line, not really. It was an uneven seam where weather stopped behaving the way it should. Snow on one side, bare ground on the other. No gradual blend, no reasonable explanation. That's where I saw the figure for the first time. I'm going to tell you about that, but not yet. Because if I start there, you'll misunderstand it the same way I did. You'll think the figure was the problem. It wasn't. The problem was that the land seemed to recognize me long before I recognized it. I still have the tape from my first winter patrol in Iron Ridge. The department archived most of the old recordings when they upgraded their system, but I kept a few. Officially, I was supposed to turn them in. Unofficially, nobody checked. On that tape, you can hear my voice steady, almost bored. I talk about road conditions, about a broken fence line, about nothing at all. There's confidence in it. The kind that comes from thinking the world follows rules you understand. What you don't hear on that tape is the pause, the silence between sentences. The way I stopped talking for almost a full minute when I reached the higher elevation road near the tree line. At the time, I told myself the radio had cut out. That happens in the mountains. Everyone knows that. Listening to it now, I know better. I wasn't silent because the radio failed. I was silent because something in me was listening. In the present, I live far from Iron Ridge. Flat country, open skies, no mountains to trap weather or sound. I chose this place because snow doesn't linger. It melts, disappears, behaves the way it's supposed to. Still, every winter, when the first snowfall comes, I find myself scanning the horizon for a line that doesn't belong there. A division where the world makes a choice and refuses to explain it. Not real. Real. Not real. That phrase started as a joke. Something I muttered under my breath the first time I felt uneasy for no obvious reason. A way to ground myself. Say it enough times and your breathing evens out. Your hands stop shaking. It worked at first. It didn't work forever. There's another tape. This one starts abruptly, like I hit record mid-thought. I don't remember doing that. On it, you can hear me say, I'm probably overthinking this, which is a strange thing to say to no one in particular. I follow it with a description of the snow, how it looks heavier past a certain point, like it's being pulled downward by something stronger than gravity. It doesn't sound like fear. It sounds like confusion pretending to be calm. If you're listening to this, you should understand something early. Iron Ridge County is not cursed. There are no legends carved into stone, no tourist stories, no dramatic warnings posted on signs. The danger there doesn't announce itself. It waits to be noticed. And when it is, it doesn't react the way danger should. It doesn't chase. It doesn't threaten. It just stands where it shouldn't, patient as weather. The figure didn't appear suddenly. That's the part that bothers me most now. It wasn't a jump scare moment, no spike of adrenaline, no sharp intake of breath. One second the snowline was empty, the next, it wasn't. As if my eyes had simply corrected themselves, revealing something that had been there all along. I didn't record that moment, or maybe I did, and the tape didn't survive it. There are gaps in the archive I can't account for. Missing minutes. Entire patrols reduced to start and end times with nothing in between. At the time, we blamed equipment. Cold drains batteries, magnetic interference messes with storage. All reasonable explanations. Reasonable explanations are very important to people who don't want to look too closely. In the years since, I've tried to reconstruct the timeline, to separate what I experienced from what I later understood. That's harder than it sounds. Memory doesn't stay in order when it's been frightened. It loops, it repeats. Certain images resurface no matter how far you think you've moved past them. The snowline, the trees holding their breath, a shape just tall enough to be mistaken for a man. Not real. Real. Not real. There's a moment on one of the later tapes where my voice lowers, like I'm afraid of being overheard. I don't explain what it is. I don't have to. Listening now, I realize that by then, I had already accepted something I hadn't consciously admitted. That whatever stood beyond the snowline was aware of patrol schedules, of routines, of the fact that I always drove alone. I want to be clear about something else before I go any further. I am not telling this story to convince you of anything supernatural. I don't have the vocabulary for that, and I don't trust it when other people use it. I'm telling this because ignoring it didn't make it go away. Because silence, I've learned, is not the same as safety. There are deputies in Iron Ridge County right now, new ones, younger ones. People who think they're just passing through, building experience before moving on to something better. I wonder what they see when the weather shifts suddenly at higher elevation. I wonder if they notice the way snow sometimes stops falling in a perfect, unnatural line. And I wonder if they tell themselves the same thing I did. Not real. Real. Not real. If you've never lived in a place where winter can kill you simply by lasting too long, it's hard to explain how quiet becomes threatening, how absence turns heavy. Iron Ridge taught me that. It taught me that some landscapes don't need to move to trap you. They just need to wait until you're the only thing moving through them. This recording isn't a warning. Warnings assume choice. This is closer to a confession, or maybe a transfer of responsibility. Once you hear it, once the idea exists in your head, you'll notice things you didn't before. Boundaries that don't make sense. Stillness where there should be wind. I don't know if telling this will make it stop. But I know pretending it never happened didn't work. And that's where the story really begins. I didn't think of Iron Ridge as a destination. It was a line item on a transfer order, a county most people only recognized because it sat between two places they actually wanted to be. When I arrived, the town looked like it had been set down temporarily and then forgotten. One main road, a diner that closed early, a sheriff's office that smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. In my present memory, the place feels dimmer than it probably was. That might be hindsight leaking backward. On my first day, I remember thinking it looked ordinary. Quiet, but ordinary. The kind of quiet that comes from distance, not secrecy. The tape from that morning still exists. You can hear the way I introduce myself to the desk sergeant. My voice crisp, professional. I mention the weather because that's what people do when they don't know what else to say. Snow expected later in the week, nothing unusual. I didn't know then how carefully people in Iron Ridge listened to weather reports. The county covered a wide stretch of mountain and forest, most of it uninhabited. My patrol assignments reflected that. Long drives, empty roads, hours where the radio stayed silent except for routine check-ins. I liked it at first. There's a clarity that comes with solitude. You notice things more, the way light shifts through trees, the way your own thoughts get louder when there's nothing external to interrupt them. Not real. Real, not real. I hadn't started saying that yet. That came later. My first week passed without incident. Broken fence lines, a stranded motorist whose truck gave out before the climb. Nothing that hinted at what waited farther up the mountain. The older deputies were polite but distant. Conversation stayed surface level. When I asked about certain access roads marked on the map but rarely used, the answers were vague. All of that was true, technically. The access road near the tree line wasn't on my initial rotation. It came up after another deputy called in sick. The assignment was casual, almost an afterthought. Check the upper stretch. Make sure no one had tried to push past the weather warnings. Turn back before dark. On the tape from that patrol, you can hear me humming quietly to myself. A habit I didn't realize I had. The engine noise fills most of the space, steady and reassuring. I comment on the temperature drop as I gain elevation. That's normal. Mountains make their own rules. The first thing that struck me was how abruptly the snow appeared. One moment the road was wet but clear. The next, it was covered in a thin, unbroken layer of white. No gradual transition, no flurries leading up to it. Just snow, settled and complete, like it had been there longer than I had. I slowed the vehicle. That's procedure. Adjust to conditions. Still, something about it made me uneasy in a way I couldn't justify. Snow usually announces itself. It comes with wind, or clouds, or at least a sense of movement. This snow felt placed. In the present, that's the word that keeps coming back. Placed. As if someone had decided exactly where it should begin. I stopped the patrol car and stepped out to check the road. The cold was sharper than expected, biting through my gloves. My breath fogged immediately, hanging in the air longer than it should have. I remember looking up at the trees, half expecting to see snow clinging to their branches. There was none. Behind me, the road remained clear. Ahead, it vanished into white. The boundary between the two was uneven but distinct, like a seam stitched by an unsteady hand. On the tape, there's a pause here. 30 seconds where I don't speak. I'd like to tell you I was making notes, or checking my surroundings. The truth is simpler. I was standing still, trying to decide why my instincts were telling me to get back in the car. Instinct is an odd thing. It doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It just waits. Persistent and patient, until you either listen or regret not listening. I told myself it was nothing. Mountain weather. microclimates, all the explanations they teach you when you work rural law enforcement. I took a step forward onto the snow. It didn't crunch the way I expected. The sound was muted, almost absorbed. I looked down at my boot and saw the print clearly defined, deeper than the thin layer should have allowed. When I lifted my foot, the impression remained. That's when I noticed the lack of tracks. The road ahead was empty. No tire marks, no footprints. No signs that anyone, or anything, had passed through since the snow had settled. That alone wasn't alarming. The road wasn't heavily used. But paired with how suddenly the snow had appeared, it felt wrong. I radioed it in. Routine update. On the tape, my voice stays even as I describe the conditions. I say the word unusual, but I laugh lightly after, like I'm downplaying it even to myself. The response from dispatch came back delayed. Not garbled, just late. As if my words had taken the long way around before returning to me. Present-day me listens to that delay over and over, measuring it, trying to decide when it crossed from technical glitch to something else. I still don't know. I turned back then. That's important. I didn't push forward. I told myself I'd log it, mention it to the others. Maybe come back with chains if needed. As I walked back toward the car, I had the distinct sensation of being observed. Not watched in the dramatic sense, more like acknowledged, as if something had registered my presence and filed it away. Not real. Real. Not real. That night, I dreamed of the road. In the dream, I stood at the boundary again. But this time the snow extended farther, creeping back toward the town. I woke with my heart racing, embarrassed by how deeply it had affected me. On the next day's tape, you can hear me mention the dream as a joke to another deputy. He doesn't laugh. There's a brief silence before he changes the subject. I wish I'd asked him why. Instead, I went back to the access road 2 days later, telling myself I was just following up. The weather report hadn't mentioned snow at that elevation. Conditions should have been clear. They were, mostly. The snowline had moved. It wasn't by much, a few yards at most. But I recognized the spot where I'd turned back, the bend in the road, the rock outcropping on the left. The boundary now sat just past it, like it had taken a cautious step forward. On that tape, my humming stops. I don't say anything for a long time. When I finally speak, it's barely above a whisper, though I don't seem to realize it. Probably nothing, I say. Listening now, years later, I hear the doubt underneath. The way my voice wavers, just slightly. The way certainty is already eroding. I didn't see the figure that day. Not yet. But I felt its absence the way you feel a missing tooth with your tongue. Constantly, without knowing why. The land was no longer just land. It was paying attention. The first time I saw the figure, I didn't recognize it as an event. That sounds strange, but it's important. I didn't feel a jolt of fear or surprise. There was no moment where my thoughts snapped into focus and said, something is wrong. It registered the same way a tree does when you're driving, present, undeniable, and somehow already accounted for, even if you don't remember noticing it before. I know this because of the tape. I had returned to the access road alone just before dusk. The light was thinning, stretching shadows across the road in long pale bands. I remember thinking I should turn back soon. Policy said not to linger in low visibility. Experience said nothing good came from pushing the mountain after dark. On the recording, my voice is calm, almost casual. I'm describing the temperature, the road conditions, the way the snow line looks heavier than before. I say, "It's like it's waiting." And then I laugh softly, as if I've surprised myself by saying something that doesn't quite make sense. There's a pause after that, longer than any of the others. When I speak again, my tone has changed, though I don't acknowledge it. I don't specify what that something is. At the time, I didn't have language for it. I just knew that the space beyond the snow line wasn't empty anymore. The figure stood where the road curved slightly to the left, just beyond the boundary. It wasn't fully in the snow, not exactly. It stood at the place where white met dark pavement, as if it understood the importance of staying precisely there. Tall enough to be mistaken for a man at a distance. Broad enough in the shoulders to trigger recognition. Too still to be comfortable. I remember squinting, adjusting my stance, trying to resolve details. My mind reached immediately for the familiar. A hiker, a stranded driver. Someone who needed help and didn't know how to signal it properly. That's the dangerous part of recognition. It fills in gaps you haven't actually seen. I called out. Standard procedure. Clear, loud, authoritative. On the tape, my voice echoes back to me faintly, flattened by the cold air. There's no response. The figure doesn't react. It doesn't turn its head. It doesn't shift its weight. I take a step forward. I can hear my boots moving on the recording. But what I remember is the way the distance between us seemed unchanged. Like the road had stretched itself, quietly, without asking permission. Present-day me has replayed that segment more times than I can count. I've slowed it down. I've listened for anything unusual in my breathing, any sign that my body knew more than my mind did. There's a moment where my inhale catches, just slightly. A fraction of a second where the rhythm breaks. I say the phrase then, for the first time. Not real. Real. I don't know why I said it out loud. Maybe hearing it made it more convincing. Maybe part of me already knew that thinking it wasn't enough. I took another step. This time the snow beneath my boot compressed deeper than it should have, as if the ground had softened. The figure seemed closer now, though I couldn't say how it had moved. There was no motion to track, no transition from one place to another, just a revised understanding of distance. That's when I noticed the proportions were wrong. At first glance, it looked human because my brain wanted it to. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head set atop shoulders. But the longer I looked, the more those details refused to settle. The arms hung too straight, too parallel to the body. The head didn't tilt or sway the way a person's would, even standing still. It was as if the shape were an idea of a person, rather than a person itself. On the tape, my breathing has grown louder. I hadn't noticed it at the time. Fear has a way of disguising itself as focus. I tell dispatch I might have found someone disoriented near the road. My voice is steady enough that I almost believe it. The response comes back slow, not distorted, just delayed. When it does, the dispatcher asks me to repeat myself. She sounds tired, normal, unconcerned. I don't repeat myself. I don't know why. Instead, I lower the radio and take another step forward. And that's when the figure changes. It doesn't move in the way you'd expect. There's no walking, no shift of weight. It simply occupies a nearer position, like a piece on a board that's been slid forward when you weren't looking. Close enough now that I can see its surface isn't quite solid. The edges blur slightly, as if the air around it is struggling to agree on where it ends. I stop. Completely. There's a long silence on the tape. No words, no movement, just the faint sound of my own breath. In the present, I understand that moment as a kind of negotiation, not an exchange of words, but of attention. I was looking at it, fully, without the buffer of explanation, and it was, considering me. That's the only word that fits, even if it sounds absurd, not real. Real, not real. The phrase loops in my head, faster now, less convincing. I remember thinking, if this is a person, they'll respond. If it's an animal, it'll flee. Neither happens. Instead, I become aware of something else. The absence of sound. Not silence exactly, but a flattening. Like the world has been wrapped in heavy fabric. My own breathing sounds distant, disconnected from my body. I take a step back. The figure doesn't follow. It doesn't need to. The distance remains the same, as if retreat is just another illusion I've invented to comfort myself. That's when fear finally arrives. Late, but overwhelming. It doesn't come with panic. It comes with clarity. The sudden, undeniable understanding that I am not in control of this situation and never was. I raise my flashlight, more out of habit than hope. The beam washes over the figure, and for a moment, just a moment, I think it flickers. Not recoiling, not reacting, but adjusting, as if it's learning how to be seen. On the tape, I whisper something then. I've played it over and over, trying to make out the words. They're indistinct, but I know what I was saying because I remember the thought behind it. Please don't move. I don't know who that plea was for. The figure doesn't move. Instead, it does something worse. It aligns. I realize with a cold, sinking certainty that it's standing the way I'm standing, feet set at the same angle, shoulders squared the same way, head held at the same slight tilt. A mirror, but not quite accurate. Close enough to be unsettling. Wrong enough to be unmistakable. I step back again. This time the distance increases. Relief flares, brief and sharp. Maybe retreat works after all. Maybe boundaries still matter. Then I blink. The figure is closer than it's ever been, just at the edge of the snowline. Close enough now that I can see there are no features where its face should be. Not blank exactly, more like unfinished, as if detail is optional, dependent on need. On the tape, there's a sharp intake of breath. I finally raise my voice, calling out again, louder, commanding. The words sound hollow even to me. The figure doesn't respond. It doesn't need to. Something in me breaks then. Not completely. Just enough to let doubt flood in where certainty used to live. I back away quickly, nearly stumbling, and for the first time since stepping onto the road, I turn my back on it. That's a mistake, according to every rule I've ever learned. You don't turn your back on the unknown. You maintain visual contact. You control the situation. But control had already left the equation. I reach the patrol car and fumble with the door, my hands clumsy despite the adrenaline. When I finally slide inside and slam it shut, the world seems to rush back in all at once. Sound, cold, movement. I start the engine without hesitation. I look back at the road. The snow line is empty. No figure, no disturbance, no sign that anything had ever stood there at all. On the tape, I laugh then. A short, sharp sound that doesn't reach my eyes. I say, just my imagination. Like that settles it. I drive away too fast, tires slipping slightly on the clear pavement. I don't report the encounter. Not fully. I log it as a weather anomaly. Poor visibility. Nothing more. That night, I dream of standing at the Snowline again. In the dream, the figure is gone, but I know exactly where it would be if it were there. The knowledge sits in me, heavy and certain. In the present, I know that was the moment it learned something important. Not about the road, about me. After the first encounter, I told myself I would let it go. That's the story I gave everyone else, and for a while, I almost believed it myself. I didn't return to the access road for several days. I volunteered for town patrols, paperwork, anything that kept me away from higher elevation. From the outside, it probably looked like caution. From the inside, it felt like avoidance dressed up as professionalism. The tapes from that period are sparse, short recordings, routine language. I sound like someone trying very hard to sound normal. Listening now, I hear the effort in every sentence. I over-explain things that don't matter. I avoid mentioning the weather unless I absolutely have to. But the mountain doesn't care what you avoid. It started with small things. A report filed by another deputy about tire tracks that ended abruptly near the tree line. No turnaround marks. No indication of where the vehicle went. A missing hiker whose last known location sat uncomfortably close to the access road. Nothing conclusive. Nothing that demanded attention. But enough that a pattern began to suggest itself if you looked too long. I told myself I wasn't looking. There's a tape from a late-night shift where I'm alone in the office, reviewing old incident logs. You can hear the shuffle of papers, the faint hum of fluorescent lights. I speak quietly, mostly to organize my thoughts. I read dates out loud, names, coordinates. It sounds methodical, detached. What the tape doesn't capture is the tightening in my chest as I realize how many reports mention the same vague phrasing. Chose not to proceed. That phrase appears more often than it should. I cross-reference names. Some of them are familiar. Deputies who transferred out. Deputies who retired early. Deputies who simply stopped showing up one winter and were quietly replaced. No official explanations. No dramatic send-offs. Just absences absorbed into routine. Not real. Not real. I start to wonder how many of them saw what I saw, or something like it. In one of the logs, there's a handwritten note in the margin. The ink is faded, the handwriting cramped and uneven. No date, no signature, just that sentence underlined twice. Again implies precedent, history, recurrence. I took the log to one of the older deputies the next day, asked him if he remembered the note. He glanced at it briefly, then slid it back across the desk without comment. When I pressed him, he shrugged and said paperwork was messy back then. People wrote things they didn't mean. Weather made everyone jumpy. His eyes didn't meet mine. That was when I realized something else had changed. People had started watching me the way you watch someone who asks the wrong kind of question. Not suspiciously. Warily, like they were afraid curiosity might be contagious. The next tape is from a patrol I didn't log officially. I remember deciding to take the long way back after a call, convincing myself it was just to check road conditions. The sky was low and heavy, the kind of gray that makes distances hard to judge. As I climbed, the familiar tension returned, settling into my shoulders like a weight I'd been carrying longer than I remembered. I didn't intend to reach the Snowline that day. I did anyway. The boundary was there, waiting, just as before. Clean, deliberate. The road behind me was bare and wet. Ahead, it vanished into white. I stopped the vehicle without thinking, my hands already moving through the motions before my mind caught up. My voice sounds flat, observational, like I'm commenting on a fallen tree or a rock slide. Inside, something tightens, coils. I step out of the car, This time, I don't cross the boundary. I stand just short of it, studying the line where snow begins. The edge is sharper than it should be, almost geometric in places. I crouch and touch it with my gloved hand. The snow is cold, obviously, but there's something else there, too. Resistance. As if it's packed tighter than it should be, compressed by an unseen weight. I pull my hand back quickly, unsettled by how reluctant it felt to let go. Not real. Real. Not real. I don't see the figure at first. That absence is almost worse than its presence. I scan the road ahead, the trees beyond, the empty space where it had stood before. Nothing. Relief creeps in, cautious and thin. Maybe it was a one-time thing. Stress, fatigue. The mind filling in blanks where there were none. Then I notice the footprints. They begin just beyond the snow line, deep and deliberate, leading away from the road and into the forest. Each print is spaced evenly, as if placed with care. They don't wander or hesitate. They go straight, disappearing between the trees. I kneel to examine them, noting the lack of tread pattern. No distinguishing marks, just impressions shaped vaguely like boots, but smoother, less defined, as if whoever made them was approximating the idea of footwear rather than wearing it. On the tape, my breathing grows louder. I say, "These are fresh," though I have no way of knowing that. The snow around them is undisturbed. No falling flakes, no wind-softened edges. They look as though they were made moments ago. I straighten slowly, my eyes following the line of prints into the trees. That's when I feel it again. The sensation of being regarded, not watched from a specific point, but acknowledged by the space itself. As if the forest has tilted its attention toward me. I don't follow the tracks. That decision feels important now. A fork in the road I didn't take. At the time, it felt like common sense. Backup protocol, safety, all the reasons you give yourself when you don't want to admit you're afraid. I photograph the prints, mark the location, and retreat to the car. On the drive back, I keep glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see movement behind me. There's nothing. That night, I dream of the footprints again. In the dream, they don't lead away from the road. They circle it, looping endlessly, each step landing perfectly in the last. When I wake, the phrase is on my lips before I'm fully conscious. Not real. Real. Not real. The next few days blur together. Reports come in about strange conditions near the higher elevations. Radios cutting out. Time estimates not lining up. One deputy mentions feeling disoriented after a patrol, like he'd driven the same stretch of road twice without realizing it. I listen carefully. I don't interrupt. I don't offer explanations. In the present, I recognize that as the beginning of the spiral. The moment where observation turns into fixation, where you stop asking if something is wrong and start asking how long it's been wrong. There's a tape from that week where I speak directly into the recorder, my voice low and deliberate. That last part slips out before I can stop it. I don't know where the idea comes from. Intuition, pattern recognition, or maybe something planted quietly in my thoughts, waiting for the right moment to surface. What I do know is that after that realization, the mountain felt closer. Not physically, but in a way that's harder to articulate. Like a presence just outside your peripheral vision, impossible to ignore once you're aware of it. The figure doesn't appear again that week, but I stop expecting it to. And that, I think now, is exactly what it wanted. The longer the figure stayed away, the more convinced I became that its absence wasn't accidental. Silence, I was learning, could be just as deliberate as presence. I found myself listening for it everywhere. In the pauses between radio transmissions, in the way conversations in the office stopped when I entered, in the uneasy rhythm of my own thoughts when I tried to sleep. The tapes from this period are disjointed. Some begin mid-sentence, others end abruptly, like I'd lost interest in whatever I was saying. A few contain nothing but minutes of quiet breathing before a sudden click. The recorders shut off without explanation. I don't remember making most of them. On one tape dated 3 days after the footprints, I'm driving at night. The road noise is steady, but there's a strange cadence to it, like the engine sound is looping over itself. Then, less than 2 minutes later, I say it again. Same time, same inflection, as if no time has passed at all. I laugh softly after the second mention, an edge of nervous disbelief in it. That's weird, I say. It wasn't the clock. I started noticing gaps in my memory, not dramatic blackouts, but subtle skips. I'd leave the station at dusk and arrive back hours later with no recollection of the patrol in between. My mileage would be off. The fuel gauge lower than expected. When I tried to reconstruct the route in my head, it felt like pressing against fog, resistance without substance, not real, real, not real. I repeated the phrase more often now, sometimes unconsciously, under my breath while driving, in my head while reading reports. It had lost its grounding effect, becoming instead a marker of distress, like a verbal tic I couldn't suppress. The snowline began appearing in places it shouldn't have, not physically at first, not in a way I could photograph or log. It appeared in reflections, in the dark glass of the patrol car window, dividing my face unevenly, in puddles after a thaw, a thin white line cutting across the surface like a scar. I'd blink, look again, and it would be gone. On one tape, I describe seeing it in the office bathroom mirror. I joke about needing sleep, about stress playing tricks on me. But my voice trembles just slightly, enough that I notice it even then. I clear my throat and change the subject. Sleep didn't help. My dreams shifted. They were no longer about the road itself, but about thresholds. Doorways that led nowhere. Staircases that ended in blank walls. In one recurring dream, I stand at the edge of a frozen lake. The ice is perfectly clear, and beneath it, I can see something standing upright, mirroring my posture exactly. When I raise my hand, it does the same. When I try to step back, I realize my feet are frozen in place. I wake from those dreams with the phrase already forming in my mouth. Not real. Real. Not real. There's a tape from a patrol near the end of that week that I still have trouble listening to. It starts normally enough, routine check-in, weather notes, but halfway through my voice trails off. For several seconds, there's only the sound of the engine and my breathing. I don't explain where or how. I don't even sound surprised. I'm driving on a stretch of road far from the access point, lower elevation, no reason for snow at all. And yet, there it is. Thin at first, almost delicate, stretching across the road ahead. A pale line, barely visible, like frost that hasn't decided whether it wants to exist. I slow the car. My heart rate spikes, audible in the tightness of my breath. The line thickens as I approach, resolving into unmistakable snow. Beyond it, the road looks different. Not just snow-covered, but muted. Like color and depth have been dialed back. I stop before reaching it. The figure stands on the far side. It's closer this time. Close enough that I don't need to squint. Close enough that my mind gives up on trying to force it into a familiar category. It doesn't look unfinished anymore. It looks corrected. More precise, the proportions still aren't quite right, but they're closer than before, as if it's been refining itself. The worst part is the posture. It stands the way I stand when I'm waiting for someone to make a decision. Patient, neutral, neither aggressive nor passive. Just present. I don't call out this time. I don't raise the radio. I sit there, hands locked on the steering wheel, staring through the windshield. My thoughts feel sluggish, like they're moving through deep water. Not real. Real. Not real. The phrase doesn't help. It barely registers. Something shifts then, not in the figure but in me. A realization surfaces, cold and unwelcome. I've been assuming this thing reacts to me, watches me, learns from me. But what if that's backward? What if it's been waiting for me to learn? Does ça m'émanage? It sounds like a statement, not a command. The figure doesn't respond. But I feel a pressure behind my eyes, a sensation like standing too close to a loud sound. Images flash through my mind. The footprints leading into the forest, the handwritten note in the log, deputies who left without explanation, patterns I'd noticed but refused to complete. The figure takes a step. This time I see it move. The leg lifts, bends at the knee, lowers again. The motion is careful, deliberate, almost rehearsed. The snow beneath its foot doesn't scatter or compress. It simply accepts the weight, as if this has always been how things were meant to be. I jerk backward in my seat, the sudden movement snapping me out of whatever trance I've fallen into. My hand flies to the gear shift. The engine revs loudly, the sound startling in the muffled air. The figure stops. We stay like that for a long moment, locked in a kind of stalemate. Then, slowly, it raises its arm. My arm lifts before I realize what I'm doing. On the tape, there's a sharp gasp. I drop my arm immediately, pressing it against my side like it's betrayed me. The figure lowers its arm too, the motion perfectly synchronized. The implication hits me harder than fear ever has. This isn't mimicry. It's alignment. The snowline creeps forward, inch by inch, closing the distance between us without either of us moving. I feel a pull in my chest, subtle but insistent, like a tide drawing back before a wave. I slam the car into reverse and floor it. The world lurches, the road blurring as I speed away. I don't look back. I don't slow down until I'm well below the elevation where snow has any right to exist. When I finally stop, my hands are shaking so badly I have to sit on them to keep them still. The tape ends abruptly there. In the present, I know that was the moment reality started to unravel for me. Not because something impossible happened, but because something consistent did. The rules were changing, and they were doing so methodically, with purpose. After that night, the figure didn't just appear on patrols. It appeared in my thoughts. When I closed my eyes, I could picture it standing at the edge of the snow line, waiting, not impatient, not threatening, just certain. And somewhere, deep beneath the fear, another thought began to take shape. What if it wasn't trying to cross the boundary? What if it was trying to teach me how? After that night, the department stopped feeling like a place of work and started feeling like a temporary shelter. Somewhere to stand while the ground shifted beneath everything else. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen on the lower road. Not fully. I mentioned strange snow patterns, inconsistent weather. I let them supply the explanations. People are very good at doing that for you when the alternative makes them uncomfortable. The tapes, however, tell a different story. There's one dated a week later, where I speak in a low, careful voice, like I'm afraid the walls might be listening. By then, I was sleeping in fragments. Short stretches followed by abrupt waking, my mind racing as if it had been running even while my body rested. I'd sit up in bed, convinced I'd heard something shift just outside my field of vision. Not a sound. A change in presence. The sense that the room had been arranged slightly differently than I remembered. In daylight, I could usually shake it off. The ordinary rhythms of work helped. Forms, radios, conversations that stayed firmly rooted in the mundane. But the feeling never fully left. It lingered, patient, waiting for quiet moments to resurface. The figure began appearing in places that made no sense. Not physically at first. Not in a way I could point to and say, there. It showed up in negative space, in the gap between parked cars, in the way a hallway seemed longer than it should be when no one else was around. Once I caught myself slowing down as I approached a doorway, instinctively preparing to stop at an invisible line that wasn't there. Not real. Real. Not real. The phrase had become less of a reassurance and more of a test, a way to check whether my thoughts were still my own. There's a tape from a late shift where I'm back on the access road, though I don't remember deciding to go there. I describe the drive as if narrating it will anchor me. The trees, the slope, the way the air grows heavier with elevation. I mention that the Snowline is visible again, farther down than ever before. I don't sound surprised. I think this is where it wants me, I say quietly. That sentence scares me more now than anything else on the recording. Not because of what it implies about the figure, but because of what it reveals about me. The acceptance in my voice. The absence of resistance. I stop the car just short of the boundary and step out. The cold bites immediately, sharper than it should be for the season. My breath clouds the air, lingering longer than before. The snow line stretches across the road like a deliberate mark, uneven but unmistakable. The figure stands on the far side, exactly where I expect it to be. It looks more complete now, the outline sharper, the posture unmistakably familiar. When I shift my weight, it doesn't mirror me immediately. There's a delay this time, like it's choosing when to respond rather than reacting automatically. That difference matters. I talk to it, not in commands or questions, just words, spilling out because silence feels dangerous. I tell it my name. I tell it how long I've worked in Iron Ridge. I tell it I don't understand what it wants. On the tape, my voice sounds calm, almost conversational. Anyone listening without context might think I'm alone, talking to myself to stay focused. The figure doesn't respond verbally, but something changes in the air, subtle and undeniable. The pressure behind my eyes intensifies, accompanied by a strange sensation in my chest, like a deep breath being drawn that isn't mine. Images surface again, unbidden. Snow falling upward. Footprints circling the road. Faces I recognize only vaguely, their features blurred as if recalled from someone else's memory. I realize with a jolt that some of these images don't belong to me at all. Not real. Real. Not real. The figure steps closer. This time the snow line moves with it, sliding forward as if tethered to its presence. The boundary isn't fixed. It never was. It's responsive. Understanding hits me slowly, like the onset of hypothermia. The figure isn't confined by the snow line. The snow line is confined by the figure. A marker, not a prison. a place where transition happens. I feel something tug at me then, not physically, but conceptually, like an idea trying to settle into my thoughts, rearranging them to make room for itself. The sense of alignment returns, stronger than before. My stance shifts without conscious input, my body adjusting to match something just out of reach. I fight it. Or at least, I think I do. I clench my fists, dig my boots into the ground. The effort feels symbolic, like pushing against a tide with your hands. "You're not me," I say aloud. The words sound thin. The figure tilts its head for the first time. The movement is subtle, but it sends a jolt through me. Recognition flares, not in the sense of familiarity, but of acknowledgement, as if it's finally seeing me clearly. On the tape, my breathing grows uneven. I repeat my name over and over, like a mantra. I list details about myself, where I grew up, why I joined law enforcement, mundane facts clung to desperately. The figure remains still, but the pressure increases. The images become sharper now, more specific. I see patrol cars abandoned on snowy roads, radios lying half buried in drifts, men standing at the Snowline, each one slightly different, each one painfully familiar. Deputies. Not real. Real. Not real. The realization doesn't come as a sudden shock. It unfolds gradually, each piece settling into place with dreadful inevitability. The figure isn't a singular entity. It's a role, a position maintained over time, a watcher at the boundary, shaped by those who come too close and stay too long. I stagger back, my heart hammering. The pull intensifies, like something tightening a rope around my chest. Panic finally breaks through, sharp and undeniable. I reach for my weapon. The motion is automatic, drilled into muscle memory. The weight of it in my hand is reassuring, familiar. A symbol of authority, of control. On the tape, you can hear the click as I disengage the safety. I aim at the figure's center mass, though I'm no longer sure what that means. "Don't," I say, and I don't know who I'm addressing. The figure doesn't react. It doesn't need to. The idea settles into my mind with quiet certainty. This won't stop it. Violence isn't a language it understands. Or maybe it understands it too well. Still, my finger tightens on the trigger. There's a moment, brief, crystalline, where I imagine what will happen if I step forward instead. If I cross the boundary willingly. The image that forms isn't of death or disappearance. It's of standing, watching, waiting. The snow line stretching endlessly before me, the world divided neatly into before and after. The temptation terrifies me. I lower the weapon, breathing hard. The figure remains, patient as ever. The snow line pulses faintly, as if responding to an unseen rhythm. I back away slowly, never turning my back this time. Each step feels like wading through resistance, the air thick and uncooperative. The pull weakens as I increase the distance, but it never disappears entirely. When I finally reach the car, I collapse into the driver's seat, shaking. I start the engine and drive away, my mind a tangle of fear and unwanted understanding. The tape doesn't end there. It keeps recording as I descend, my muttered thoughts filling the space. I talk about boundaries, about jobs that need doing, about how someone always has to stand watch. In the present, listening to it, I hear the shift in my voice, the subtle change in perspective, less me than before. That's when I know the haunting had fully manifested. Not because the figure was stronger, but because part of me was beginning to agree with it. I didn't quit right away. That's something I struggle to explain, even now. After everything I'd seen, everything I'd begun to understand, walking away should have been the obvious choice. But knowledge doesn't always lead to escape. Sometimes it narrows your options until only one path feels coherent. The tapes from my final weeks in Iron Ridge reflect that narrowing. My voice grows steadier, more deliberate. The fear doesn't vanish, but it reorganizes itself, settling into something colder and more focused. I stop speculating. I stop asking questions. I start documenting. I don't specify who they are. I don't need to. By then, the pattern is unmistakable. Deputies didn't disappear because something hunted them. They disappeared because they reached a point where staying made more sense than leaving. That realization hollowed me out. I begin revisiting old logs more methodically, cross-checking dates with weather reports, patrol assignments, transfer records. I'm looking for confirmation, but also for reassurance. Some indication that what I'm seeing is coincidence, not design. I don't find it. What I do find is a rhythm. Every few years, sometimes sooner, there's a disruption. A deputy reports unusual conditions near the boundary. Snow behaving strangely. Time discrepancies. Feelings of being watched. The reports taper off after that. Either the deputy transfers, retires, or their name simply stops appearing in the logs. The position remains filled. Not real. Real, not real. The phrase barely registers anymore. It's lost its power, stripped down to a vestigial habit, a relic from when denial still felt useful. The figure appears again, not on the road this time, but in a place that feels deliberately chosen to break what resistance I have left. I'm in the evidence room, cataloging old items that no one has claimed in years. The fluorescent lights hum overhead, the air stale and still. I glance up from a box of misplaced radios and see it reflected in the metal cabinet door. It stands behind me, perfectly aligned with my posture, its head angled at the same slight tilt. The reflection is faint but unmistakable. I freeze, my pulse roaring in my ears. Slowly, I turn. There's nothing there. When I look back at the cabinet, the reflection is gone. I sit down hard on the concrete floor, my legs suddenly unreliable. The tape captures my breathing, fast and shallow. I press my palms to my eyes, trying to anchor myself in sensation. "This isn't happening," I whisper. The words feel obligatory. That night I dream without imagery. No snow, no road. Just a sense of standing watch, of time passing without measure. I wake with the feeling of responsibility heavy on my chest. Like a weight I've agreed to carry. In the days that follow, the pull intensifies. It's no longer limited to the mountain or the snow line. It manifests as a constant pressure, a subtle alignment of my thoughts toward a single conclusion. Someone has to be there. Someone always is. I begin to wonder if resisting is what causes the distortion. If the land is simply correcting for imbalance, nudging things back into place. On one of the last tapes I make in Iron Ridge, I speak directly to the recorder, my tone eerily calm. "I think it's easier if you don't fight it," I say. I don't know who I'm trying to convince. The final encounter happens on a morning so ordinary, it feels like a cruel joke. Clear sky. No snow in the forecast. I'm scheduled for a routine patrol, nothing near the access road. Halfway through the shift, I turn onto it anyway. I don't remember deciding to do that. The Snowline is there, waiting, farther down the road than it's ever been. The figure stands just beyond it, closer than ever. When I step out of the car, There's no fear this time. Just a deep, aching sadness. Like saying goodbye to something you never wanted but can't avoid. I know, I say quietly. The figure inclines its head, a gesture so subtle it might be imagined. The air feels thick, charged, as if the world is holding its breath. I take a step forward. The pull eases instantly, replaced by a strange sense of rightness. The boundary doesn't resist me. The snow line doesn't shift. It welcomes. Not real. Real, not real. The phrase dissolves completely. I don't know how long I stand there. Time loses meaning beyond the boundary. There is only observation. The road. The forest. The world divided neatly into what approaches and what retreats. And then, something changes. A sound. Distant. Familiar. A patrol car engine. The moment fractures. I'm back in my body, back in my fear, the clarity shattered by the intrusion of another presence. I stumble backward, gasping, the pulse snapping into something sharp and painful. The figure reacts, not with anger, but with something like urgency. For the first time, it reaches for me. The contact is brief, incomplete, but it leaves an impression deeper than any physical mark. Images flood me. Years, decades of standing watch. Faces blurring together. Seasons cycling endlessly. The quiet certainty of purpose. I scream. The next thing I remember is lying on the road, the snow line several yards away. Another deputy kneels beside me, his face tight with concern. He asks if I'm okay, if I slipped, if I hit my head. I tell him I don't know. In the official report, it's logged as an incident of exhaustion and exposure. I'm put on mandatory leave, evaluated, cleared, encouraged to transfer. I don't argue. I leave Iron Ridge County 2 weeks later. No ceremony, no goodbyes. The mountain recedes in my rearview mirror, solid and silent. But something comes with me. In the present, I can still feel it sometimes. The pull, the alignment, the knowledge of where the boundary is, even when I can't see it. I know now why the figure looked so familiar. It wasn't becoming me. It was reminding me of what I almost became. And somewhere in Iron Ridge County, the snow line still exists. And someone is standing there. I stopped listening to the tapes for a long time after I left Iron Ridge. I told myself it was part of moving on, that reopening those recordings would only drag me backward into a place I barely escaped. For years that excuse worked well enough. I built a life that didn't involve mountains or long winters. I learned the names of my neighbors. I planted things in the ground and watched them grow where I could see them. From the outside, I looked like someone who had recovered. What I didn't account for was how memory behaves when it's unfinished. The first time I listened again was accidental. I'd been cleaning out a box of old electronics, things I'd carried with me through 3 moves without ever unpacking. The recorder was heavier than I remembered, solid, familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. I stood there for a long time, turning it over in my hands, telling myself I was just curious. That's what we always tell ourselves. The tape that played wasn't the first one I made. It wasn't even one I remembered clearly. My voice sounded younger, sharper, less careful. I was describing a routine patrol, complaining about the cold, joking about the lack of cell service. It felt like listening to someone else entirely. Then there was a pause. And in that pause, something stirred. I don't mean on the tape. I mean in me. A familiar pressure, subtle but unmistakable. Like standing just short of a line you know you're not supposed to cross, even if you can't see it. I shut the recorder off and sat there in the quiet, my heart racing. The room felt unchanged, but my awareness of it had shifted. I found myself scanning corners, doorways, reflective surfaces, old habits, resurfacing without permission. Not real. Real. Not real. The phrase came back easily, like it had never really left. After that, the tapes stopped being optional. I began listening to them in order, spacing it out, one every few days, as if rationing exposure might dull the effect. It didn't. If anything, it sharpened it. Patterns I hadn't noticed before emerged clearly. The way my language changed over time. The way certainty eroded and was replaced by something quieter, heavier. Acceptance. There's a tape near the end that I hadn't remembered making at all. My voice is low, almost reverent. I'm not describing anything specific. I'm talking about watching, about how stillness isn't emptiness, how waiting can be an act of care. I use the word necessary more than once. Listening to it now, I understand why I don't remember recording it. Some memories protect themselves by staying buried. In the present, I try to track the changes in myself the way I once tracked patrol routes. Objectively, methodically. I note how winter unsettles me more than it should. How I feel a strange sense of relief when snow melts quickly, when boundaries blur back into something ordinary. I note how I avoid places where the land rises sharply, where weather can change its mind without warning. And I note the moments when I fail. Because there are moments, quiet ones, when I feel it again. The alignment, the sense of standing just a little straighter, of orienting myself toward something unseen. It happens most often at night, when the world narrows and distractions fall away, when thought has room to stretch. I don't think the figure followed me. That's the mistake people would make if they believed any of this at all. They'd imagine pursuit, a thing moving through space, crossing distances. That's not how it works. The figure doesn't travel. The role does. I've done enough reading since then to know that Iron Ridge isn't unique. Every region has its thresholds, places where things shift subtly, where rules loosen just enough to let something else take hold. Most of the time, people pass through them without noticing. Sometimes, someone notices too much. Sometimes, someone is noticed in return. I think about the deputy who found me on the road that morning. I wonder what he saw when he approached. A man collapsed from exhaustion. A colleague pushed too far by isolation and cold. Something explainable. Something manageable. I wonder what he sees now, years later, when winter settles in and patrols take him closer to higher elevation. I wonder if he feels the same unease I did at first, the same irritation at not being able to articulate what's wrong. I wonder if he started repeating phrases under his breath. Not real. Real. Not real. I don't keep in touch with anyone from Iron Ridge. That was a deliberate choice. Distance, I hoped, would dull whatever connection remained. And for the most part, it has. The pull is weaker now, diffuse, more like a memory of gravity than gravity itself. But memories can still guide you, even when you're not aware of it. Sometimes when snow falls here, rare, brief, harmless, I find myself watching the way it settles, looking for patterns that don't belong, lines that form too cleanly, divisions that don't soften with time. I've never seen the snow line here. That's important. Whatever Iron Ridge was balancing, it stayed there. I didn't bring it with me. I'm certain of that. What I brought was understanding. And that, I think, is the more dangerous thing. Because understanding comes with responsibility. Once you know that some boundaries exist for a reason, you start noticing when they're left unattended. When no one is standing where they should be. When the world feels just slightly out of alignment. I don't know who stands at the Snowline in Iron Ridge now. I don't know how long they've been there, or how much of themselves they've already given up to the role. I only know that the position never stays vacant for long. It can't. Every so often, I consider destroying the tapes, burning them, erasing the record completely, ending the story where it should have ended years ago. But I never do. Because silence isn't safety. And forgetting doesn't undo what's already been learned. If you're hearing this, if these words have made it into your head and settled there, I want you to understand something. I'm not asking you to believe me. Belief is too simple, too clean. I'm asking you to pay attention, to notice the places where the world feels divided in ways you can't explain, to respect the instinct that tells you not to cross certain lines, even when curiosity urges you forward, to turn back when something inside you says that going farther will cost more than you're willing to pay. Because some figures don't chase you, they wait. And sometimes, the most frightening thing isn't that they exist. It's that, under the right conditions, someone is always willing to take their place. If you're listening to this now, somewhere quiet, somewhere the weather behaves just a little strangely, I hope you never see the Snowline. And if you do, I hope you keep walking away.